Today, we're challenging ourselves to take a standard beginner-level snare drum and turn it into a concert-worthy instrument. We'll take this snare apart piece by piece and show you how to transform it into a drum you would be confident performing on in the concert hall. Hey, it's Tim from Black Swamp Percussion. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. Here we talk about all things percussion, lessons, performances, new products, and events. If that sounds good to you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next video. So what do we mean by concert snare drum? Can't you just bring your Ludwig Black Beauty from the rock gig to the symphony gig? Sure, but you probably shouldn't. Not unless you've got an ear and hands for altering your sound on the fly, or you pack a few accessories to make the switch simple and quick. The reason being is that each of these musical styles has certain characteristics that help define the percussion section. For example, you're probably not bringing your double pedal to play with the reggae band or brushes for death metal, as cool as that might all sound.
You're amazing, dude.
Thanks. I like to play.
Each part of the percussion section has an expectation of sound quality and style that let you as a player blend with the ensemble and perform as the composer intended. So let's dissect our snare drum and give you an idea of what we're working with today. Every snare drum will, or at least should, have these components. A shell, the essential vessel to hold all the other components in place. The batter and reso heads, aka top and bottom heads. Hoops and tension rods to hold these heads in place, lug casings, or more simply lugs, to receive the tension rods, a snare system which includes the strainer and butt, and snare wires attached to the strainer system. Here in the BSP studio, we have a 6.5 by 14 inch Mendini snare drum. These instruments are basic entry-level options for beginning band students and programs. They're almost too affordable, but offer all the necessary components you need to start playing the snare drum. Let's give it a listen. Okay, sounds like we've got some work ahead of us. Unfortunately, these types of drums usually find their way to the back of the percussion closet, orphaned in a band hall, or pillaged for parts. This doesn't always leave them sounding their best. But we have faith. Let's take a closer look. This drum has a wooden shell. Shell material plays a key role in defining the sound characteristics of a snare drum. Wooden shell drums, for the most part, will offer a warmer, rounder sound compared to a metal shell. But the shell isn't the whole story. If you want a deeper dive into the differences between shell types, check out our video in the description. All right, let's talk about drum heads. Snare drums have a top head called the batter head and a bottom head called the resonant head. Batter heads take the beating and reso heads bring out the tone. An oversimplification, but let's check out the heads on this drum. These are stock heads from Mendini, single ply, and plastic. They appear to be similar in thickness as well, which isn't ideal, but gets the job done. Next, let's check out the hardware of the instrument, starting with the hoops. The hoops of a snare drum are there for more than keeping the heads on. They affect the sound and feel of the drum heads. There's a lot of options to choose from. Flanged hoops, die-cast, straight hoops, wooden hoops, and a few other specialty options. This drum is using 2.3mm triple flanged hoops, a solid choice for an open tone and a natural feel to the head with plenty of give. This isn't a bad choice for a concert snare drum, but we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Lugs and tension rods are important as well. Most 14-inch diameter snare drums will either have 8 or 10 lugs on the top and bottom sides of the instrument. The more lugs on a drum, the more points of control you have when tuning the instrument. This plays a big role when dialing in your sound and getting consistent tension across every lug of your drum. A standard concert snare drum will have 10 lugs. The tension rods should also be kept in good condition. If your rods are bent, rusty, or cross-threaded, toss them out. The last thing you want is one rogue tension rod making your drum sound inconsistent and out of tune. Now, let's look at the strainer and snare wires on this drum. The strainer and butt are essential hardware for a snare drum. The strainer system is what allows you to mount snare wires onto the shell. A system like this one has a few basic features. A throw-off, which engages the snare wires and brings them in contact with the bottom head. A tension adjustment knob, which allows you to fine-tune the overall tension of the snare wires. And a butt plate, which holds the other side of the snare wires. Speaking of snare wires, let's take a look under the hood. Flipping over the drum, we see that this snare drum is using 20-strand curly snare wires, a standard setup that you'll find on 99% of drum set snares. These have a bright, aggressive sound that has plenty of dynamic range and can be adjusted to give you a tight, crisp crack or a loose peanut butter goosh for those 80s power ballads. You can see that the snare rests against the bottom head and extends from one side to the other. While most folks use curly wires on their snare drums, you might be surprised to hear there are lots of alternatives that may be better suited for our concert snare drum needs. More on that later. Alright, now that we've taken a tour of the drum, let's disassemble it and look at some new components for our concert snare drum glow up. Also, if you're enjoying this snare drum deep dive disassembly documentary, why not subscribe to the channel? It helps us out. With the heads and hoops off the drum, we now are able to take a peek inside. This is a great opportunity to tighten up any loose screws and clean your bearing edges. I prefer to use a microfiber cloth or paper towel to wipe away any dirt, dust, or drumstick shavings. If you find any chips or splits in your bearing edge, it may be worth repairing to make sure you've got a consistent edge around both sides of your drum's shell. Not to get too deep in the weeds here, but we need to make a slight detour during our reassembly. A small detail that makes a big difference are the bearing edges and snare beds of a snare drum. The bearing edges are where the drum heads make contact with the shell. As you tension the heads onto the drum, the edge of the shell where the drum heads make contact will affect the quality of sound produced by the instrument. Let me explain. In the same way we add dampening to the batter head to dry up, darken the sound, or remove resonance, the amount of contact the bearing edge has with the head will determine the tone quality. Another word for this is timbre. So what do we want for a concert style snare drum? Well, it depends on your personal preference, but here at Black Swamp, we prefer a brighter, tone forward sound. We use a custom router bit to cut our bearing edges to be a sharp 45-degree angle on the inside of the edge and a rounded 30-degree angle on the outside. Another option in the opposite direction would be a softer roundover on the outside of the edge and a 30-degree countercut on the inside. Most drum set snare drums or vintage drums use a rounded bearing edge to create a darker tone quality. If you have a vintage snare drum, chances are that drum has rounded bearing edges. Alongside bearing edges is another part of the shell worth discussing: snare beds. Snare beds are cuts within the bearing edge that line up where your snare wires mount. These beds create a path for your mounting wires or cable snare wires to wrap around the shell, through the snare gates in your hoops, and onto the strainer and butt. This bed is created in the resonant head and can be seen as a slight dip or slope where the snare wires pass through. A set of snare wires spanning across the bottom head uses lateral tension to rest against the head and react when the drum is struck. A snare bed helps accentuate the vertical tension of the snare wires, giving you more tension with less effort. Take a look at Black Swamp snare beds on our concert maple snare drums. They're deep and pronounced. Now take a look at this snare drum. They're shallow and almost invisible to the untrained eye. The difference in snare beds is intentional and helps create a sound that is suitable for the instrument. Okay, let's pick out some drum heads. Finally! In a concert setting, we want to use a thinner drum head. Thinner, single-ply drum heads will provide a crisp sound with a wider tuning range, particularly in the higher register, and will give us a lot more tone and articulation. A typical drum set snare drum will oftentimes use a thicker 2-ply batter head. This is great for drum set playing. It's thick and durable and great for low and mid tuning and has a full crack to it without excessive overtones. You don't have to follow these guidelines when selecting a drum head. Just know that each head will have its own list of pros and cons to consider. We use Remo Diplomat Renaissance batter heads on our orchestral snare drums. They are made from a 1-ply 7.5mm film that is specifically treated. They create a beautifully warm, dark tone with a soft feel and lots of articulation. However, there are plenty of other options to consider and are worth checking out. Synthetic skin heads or traditional calf heads, or one of our faves, Kentville kangaroo hide heads. Just know that hide heads are usually more expensive and require a lot more maintenance than a plastic head. After all, it is, or was, alive-ish. Righto, now let's pick out our resonant head. The resonant or snare side head will be a much thinner head and doesn't need to be changed as often as a batter head. But if you're watching this, I need to ask you, when was the last time you changed your reso heads? Yeah, that's what I thought. At the shop, we opt for Remo Hazy Diplomat resonant heads. They are single-ply 2mm clear resonant heads for maximum sensitivity. Like batter heads, there are loads of options to choose from, but for our needs, this will be just great. Installing resonant heads is nearly identical to the batter head. However, if your drum has some noticeable snare beds, you'll want to seat the head when installing it. We won't get into specifics about it here, but definitely check out our tutorial video. We'll have it linked down below along with all the other topics and products we're talking about today. Okay, time to choose some hoops. The hoops originally found on this drum were triple flange hoops. We use flange hoops for our concert maple drums and love the tone and response we get from them. However, if you want to go all the way into transforming your drum, we recommend trying out some die-cast or straight hoops. Die-cast hoops are great for creating a focused and clear sound from your snare drum. The tension of the drum head is also affected as well, giving the drum a more dense feel, versus the triple flange hoop, which has some give to the head. It's hard to explain until you've played each option side by side. We find die-cast hoops to be a great choice for concert snare drums, and we'll use them on this instrument as well. If you're looking for a sound and feel that is somewhere in between a flanged and die-cast hoop, consider straight hoops. These tension the head similarly to a die-cast hoop, but offer the tonal benefits that come with a flanged hoop. Neat. Keep in mind though, you will need claws to tension the head, and while they look super cool, can be a deal breaker for some players. But I digress. Let's move on to the strainer system and make sure we're in good shape. The strainer system on this drum is still functional and intact. The throw-off continues to engage the snare wires, and the tension adjustment knob helps us fine-tune the instrument. Great! That means we can move on to selecting our snare wires. A concert snare drum will often use cable snare wires. These are combinations of different material cables that are much drier and darker in timbre. Natural gut was the common snare material before steel cables started to be used in the 60s. Some players still prefer gut, but they are very susceptible to changes in temperature and humidity, which will affect the tension and response. Black Swamp offers a range of different cable snare wires on our concert drums, each with a specific sonic characteristic. Coated cables, similar to gut snares and have a very dry sound. Great for louder dynamics. Not so great for super quiet playing. Highest tension. Stainless steel cables, a great all-purpose cable snare that has plenty of dynamic range. Medium tension. Wire wound cables, these are literally guitar wires. Perfect for the softest of softest playing. Low tension. Because each of these cable types serves a different purpose, concert snare drums will often combine cable types. We've got several deep dive videos discussing cable snares and all of their features and benefits. There are links below for anyone who is curious about this stuff. For today, we're going to use a Black Swamp retrofit cable snare unit model S14CS. This is a combination cable unit that uses coated and stainless steel cables and will fit on any existing snare drum. Okay. Now that we've chosen our new components, it's time to put this drum back together and tune it up. All right, let's go. We'll start by placing our batter head on the drum. We line up the Black Swamp logo with the strainer system throw-off. We do this for two reasons. One, quick access to the throw-off, and two, so your playing zones on the snare drum, center, middle, edge, are all on top of the snare wires. Next, we can put on our hoops and start to finger tighten our tension rods. Make sure you're not cross-threading your tension rods in the lugs. If you feel resistance from your lug, back out, double check your angle, and rethread again. We'll repeat this process with the snare side of the drum and spend a little extra time to seat the snare side head. The idea here is to use heat to evenly distribute tension across the head as you tighten up the tension rods. If your drum has a noticeable snare bed, you'll find that applying heat while tensioning the head will remove any wrinkles that may form around the edges of the snare bed once the head is fully tightened. Having some wrinkles before tightening is normal. So I've got the batter head on, the top head, tighten that down. Just put the reso head or the bottom head on, and I've finger tightened all the tension rods into the lugs, and I'm already seeing some wrinkles in the head here. That's totally fine. The snare beds specifically in this snare drum are almost not visible, or there's really little to no snare bed, so I'm not going to take the time to basically use a heat gun and shrink the head because it's not really necessary in this case. Only go a few turns on each tension rod as you're going around, and it'll more kind of evenly tighten as you go around the head, and then you can start to draw the tension a little bit more. Don't skip any tension rods because then you get lost and you got to figure out where you are. You got to figure out what you're doing. I totally know what I'm doing right now. Okay, I'm going to tighten this up just a little bit more. These wrinkles are basically gone. Yep, no more wrinkles by the strainer butt side or by the snare gates. Cool, we've got heads and hoops on, so let's mount our cable snare wires next. The Black Swamp cable snare wires are a standard length option, meaning they will span the width of the bottom head and use mounting lines that pass through the snare gates and attach to the strainer and butt. Another version of this cable is a wraparound style. This version is only recommended if your drum has deep snare beds and a strainer system mounted high enough to accommodate the extra length. The benefit of wraparound cables is that they have constant contact with the bottom head all the way through the snare gates, which can help with articulation and sensitivity. For our drum though, we've got the standard cable snare wires and they'll sound great. This might actually take a minute. The drum is fully assembled and ready to be tuned. Without going into a master class of snare drum tuning, let's cover the basics of what you'll want to do when tuning your drum. For starters, you'll need to clear your heads. So what does clearing mean? That means all the tension rods are evenly tensioned, finger tight all around the top and bottom head. Next, you'll use 2 drum keys and slowly increase the tension of the head in a star-shaped pattern. While we don't usually tune to a specific pitch, the top and bottom heads should be medium-high to high-pitched, with the bottom head being a higher pitch than the top head. Some folks match the pitch of both heads. Some players will tune the batter head to taste, then tune the snare hide to a perfect fifth above the batter. Many players tune their batter to an A and the snare side to an E above. However, it's ultimately a personal preference. Let's hear how this baby sounds. Oh, that sounds real good. That sounds nice. Okay, another factor worth discussing here is dampening on the batter head. Orchestral percussionists often have a selection of different mutes, muffles, and weights to alter the sound of their drum. Any sort of muffling on the batter head will make the sound darker, lower in pitch, and drier. This is particularly important for soft playing, where any excess ringing or overtones can take away from nuances of the performance. We have our wooden drum dampeners, which are compact and offer a moderate amount of muffling on the head. It's also common to see towels or cloths to accomplish this same effect. It's always a good idea to keep a few muffling options in your bag to experiment with as you dial in your preferred sound for the hall or stage you're performing on. This is our 30th anniversary drum dampener. It's powder-coated steel, anti-glide technology, some reso vents here. Let's see how it sounds. So we've made a small number of big changes to this instrument, but ultimately left most of the bones intact. New top and bottom heads will always be a good idea when fixing up your snare drum. A set of new hoops is a welcome change, but not entirely necessary if you're on a budget. Cable snare wires, on the other hand, might be the biggest sonic change we've made to this drum. Listening to the before and after takes of the snare drum really show how bright and aggressive the curly snare wires are in comparison to the dark, articulate nature of the cable snares. When seeking out a concert snare drum sound, go right to the source, the snares. As an aspiring professional percussionist, you'll encounter a vast array of instruments throughout your career, each demanding unique attention and mastery. However, the reality of working within a budget often means that not every instrument can receive the dedicated time and financial investment it truly deserves. This requires a strategic approach where resourcefulness and creativity become invaluable assets. It's crucial to recognize the inherent potential within your existing gear. Rather than immediately looking to purchase new equipment, consider the transformative possibilities that lie within the instruments you already possess. With a willingness to invest time, energy, and a modest amount of cash, you can unlock significant improvements. This often involves understanding the mechanics of your instruments, exploring modifications, and perhaps even delving into DIY solutions. This not only saves money, but also fosters a deeper understanding and connection with your equipment, ultimately enhancing your performance capabilities and versatility as a percussionist. Be sure to drop a comment below if you've got any questions about today's video, and while you're there, why not boop that like and subscribe button? You know we love that stuff. Thanks. Bye.